I've actually been learning Arabic over the last 3 years. So I've gotten to the point where I can read the Holy Bible by the grace of God in Arabic, but probably like at a high school level. So not very good, like very, very slow. But my spoken Arabic is actually a little bit funny. I'll do my best to speak Arabic, and if anybody doesn't understand a particular point, I've tried to keep the talk very, very simple. So it's not going to be a very long talk. I've tried to keep it as basic as possible, so that way you understand, hopefully, the concepts as I explain them in English. And if I feel confident explaining something in Arabic, I'll do so. If you want me to stop and explain something to you in Arabic, or you have a question, my Arabic comprehension is 100%, so I can understand anything that you say in Arabic. It's just expressing it and finding the right words to use that might be a little bit difficult. So I want to make this interactive, and in fact, because the talk possibly might be quite short, possibly 15 to 20 minutes, hopefully I'll leave enough time for questions in case you guys have any questions, because I don't want to make this irrelevant. I don't want to be talking about things that don't apply to the types of families that are sitting here tonight. So I'm not going to be going too deep into theory or anything like that. I'm going to be talking about very basic principles and concepts, and we might even, if we have time at the end, go through a practical exercise in terms of how to manage stress. So the topic was, there's different understandings of the word, different definitions of the word stress. So usually when we talk about family stress, it's seen as a bad thing. So stress comes from the outside, and this is what we mean by family stress. But if we have a look at the proper definition of stress, so not the word family stress, just stress. So let's talk about stress as it is, just in general. So can you see you can see it up there on the screen. Before I get into that, sorry, I want it to be interactive. So please feel free to answer the questions, and we can have a discussion going. What is your understanding of stress? Is it a fight or flight response? Is it a thing that God created? Yeah. Is it a normal, healthy part of the human response? Yeah, it is. So when we say family stress, what are we referring to? We're referring to something healthy, or do you think that psychologists are referring to something that is bad when they say family stress? Yeah. So family stress has this negative connotation, or negative. Family stress means something coming from the outside that means that it's probably going to weaken the family and actually lead, because conflict isn't always unhealthy. Conflict is something that is not, it's not a matter of if conflict happens, in a marriage or in a family between parents and their children. Conflict is something, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. And certain pressure from the outside can make the conflict happen sooner rather than later, but conflict will happen. And where there's conflict, there's going to be stress. So I'm going to show you something in the research, in the psychological research. Sorry, let me just get my notes up here. So there were two people, one by the name of Yerkes and one by the name of Dodson. And this is called the Yerkes-Dodson graph about stress and how stress works in the human being. So on the x-axis, you have performance. This is how well we perform things. So if you're in an exam environment and you've slept well, there's a little bit of stress, hopefully that's going to help you to think a lot quicker and think on your feet. If you're very, very relaxed and you're completely stress-free, this is not a good thing. If you've had an experience where you had to think very quickly and you had to act very quickly and you couldn't find the right actions or the right words to use, it's probably because you didn't have enough stress. So that's what's happening up here. So the more the stress, so the stress level increases along the horizontal axis and the performance increases along the x-axis. So the more stress you experience, the better your performance. Your performance actually increases, and that can be for an exam situation, that can be in a family situation if there's a conflict between a husband and a wife. If you have a little bit more, like if you have a little bit of stress instead of zero stress, contrary to popular belief, you can actually communicate better with your spouse. So I mean, I'm going to paint the picture of a typical family. You've got a husband who, doesn't care about anything, is like, well, you hear about this story a lot, okay? You see it in the movies, you hear about it in society, and the woman's, stressed. And look, it could be vice versa. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the woman is the one that's the calm person in the family and the one that, but imagine you've got one of the couples are very, very stressed, too calm. And so what happens is there's a conflict that comes up because of money or paying the bills or whatever it is. What's going to happen is if there's no stress at all, then there's a tendency to not communicate very well. It's like, why should I communicate? Everything's fine. The relationship's okay. The relationship is God's going to manage the conflict. I don't have to worry. And what happens over time is that lack of communication, because there's not enough stress, what happens over time is there are negative emotions that build up, usually in the other person who is not being communicated with properly. Or if both people are not stressed and they're just kind of like very, very lazy and very relaxed and they're not stressed enough, they're probably not going to communicate. And if they don't communicate, then it's going to be the type of family where feelings are going to be bottled up inside, and there's this culture in the family where you just don't talk about problems. And you've probably met lots of families like that. I've come across many, many families where it looks peaceful on the outside, but there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of differences. If you speak to the husband, the wife he will say, look, I don't really have much of a relationship with my wife. I'm not really, I don't really know much about her. I don't really, I'm just in the marriage because of cultural reasons, because of the kids or whatever. And then you speak to the wife and she'll say things about the husband. She'll say, I don't have a good relationship, but the husband might say, we have a great relationship because it's okay and peaceful. So they don't know each other. They don't communicate well. And this passes down to the kids, and the kids notice this. And this is and trauma isn't just something that comes up when somebody goes through horrific experiences like a war, or famine, or there was abuse or things like that. There are kids, we see it all the time. There are kids in, like, from what we can see from the outside, families are very normal, but the kids can become very troubled. They can start using drugs. They can start, they'll have almost like a trauma reaction. And we don't understand why. But the research shows that trauma can develop in children because of abandonment issues, because they don't feel that there's security in the family. It could be as simple as that. And not just because of one really strong event, but it could be years and years of just being used to a family that doesn't communicate well. The kids feel that their needs are not being met. And this is what we call, it's not an obvious trauma, but it's a long-term trauma where they don't even realize that they've been traumatized. But you can see the effects of the trauma in that they're not stable, that they need to use some kind of drug. They need to get acceptance from people if they have a low self-esteem. Usually if the parents don't communicate well and they don't feel good about the relationship, they don't feel good about one another, almost always the kids will have self-esteem issues. They're not going to feel good about themselves because the parents themselves aren't good communicators and they're not secure. So it's extremely important. Everything comes from the top, like from the husband and the wife, and it trickles down to the kids. And a lot of families will say things like, when we argue away from the kids. That's good. But sometimes it's not enough. It really isn't. Because there's body language, there's things that you don't realize that happen in the way that you talk and your tone of voice. You cannot possibly be aware of everything. And so a lot of these things and signs that the relationship isn't healthy, the kids pick that up, at least subconsciously anyway. And it transfers to a kid. And the kid might not know anything. He doesn't know. He thinks it's normal, right? Or she thinks it's normal. But what happens over time, when they get a little bit older, maybe when they reach the age of 18 or in their 20s, they'll start realizing more and more that, hang on a second, this is not normal and I don't want to raise my family this way, but it's too late by then. So all of these myths that we hear about, that as long as you don't fight in front of the kids, as long as you, you know what I mean, like you keep things away from the kids, that is what's going to raise children in a healthy way, and for them to be able to be well adjusted, to be able to raise healthy families later on, that's a myth. It needs more than that. So the problem in our society is that we don't seek the help when we don't think we need it. And it's prevalent in, I find, in the Arabic culture. It's prevalent in the Asian cultures, like Chinese, Vietnamese, Arabs, you know, people from Bangladesh, Korea, you know, all of these kinds of countries, they tend to have this mentality that the less support that you require, such as seeing a psychologist or, you know, could be reading books or being proactive about, because it's not easy. Like the default, unfortunately, these days, the default means the norm, is that when you form a relationship, you become very familiar with the other person. And when you become very familiar with the other person, you can't keep on acting the same way that you did when you were first starting the relationship and it was the honeymoon period and all of that. And there's a saying that says, I don't know how to say it in Arabic. I don't know if there is an equivalent saying in Arabic, but in English it says, familiarity breeds contempt. So when you're comfortable and you get used to someone, the disrespect starts coming, you know what I mean, slowly. And if you're not really on top of it, and the disrespect can come not because you've treated somebody else badly, but simply because you just, you know, you've had kids maybe, you work 9 to 5, you come and all you're doing is you're just trying to survive. But if you're not nurturing the relationship, if you're not watering it, if you're not giving it the due care, then it's going to deteriorate. And then the kids are going to deteriorate. So talking about family stress is really important, because family stress can make this situation happen very, very quickly. Things can go downhill very, very quickly. Or if there's a little bit of stress from time to time, these things build up as well. So first of all is the understanding that stress isn't all bad. It can be bad if it's too much, but it can also be bad if there's not enough stress. Usually the problem is that there's too much stress, okay? But if we understand and accept this theory, then we're not going to think that the task is too hard. We're not going to think that it's wrong to feel stressed, because that can put an extra pressure on us as well. If I think that I shouldn't be stressed, there's something wrong with me if I'm stressed, then that's going to cause a separate problem to the fact that I'm actually stressed. Because not only am I experiencing the pain of the stress, but I'm also experiencing the mental health difficulty, thinking that there's something wrong with me, and then that's going to lower my self-esteem and confidence as well. And we know that when we don't feel good about ourselves, it's hard to respect your family. It's hard to have a good relationship with other people. So, and it's even hard to have a relationship with God as well if you don't feel good about yourself. But it goes both ways. You need to have, you know, you need to be able to have good mental health, which then improves your spirituality and your relationship with God. But then again, if it's all about mental health and there's no spirituality and there's no relationship with God, then that's a bad thing as well, because God will also help with mental health. But it's not either or. They both work together, because a lot of people think, okay, well, if I'm stressed, I'll just go to church, I'll partake of the sacraments, I'll fast, I'll pray, and it's almost like God has nothing to do with my psyche or my psychology. And that's wrong, because God isn't a magician. We don't believe in that kind of a God. We believe in a God who gives us tools and who's very organic and who helps us, but we have to rely completely on him. But we have to work hard. We can't be lazy, or we can't just be one-sided and say, the church is going to solve all my problems. It needs to be hand in hand. But anyway, I won't go too much off topic. So we talked about stress and what stress generally is. It's a human response that God has in fact created it. If stress is bad, think about it. Why would God create something bad? God doesn't create anything bad. Animals experience stress. If this church, God forbid, catches fire and we're not stressed out, we'll probably burn alive, right? Thinking, it's okay, don't worry, sometimes, we tend to have that mentality. But stress is going to help us it's going to help the adrenaline pump through our bodies, go into our muscles, and we're going to be able to run faster and think quicker and get out of here. And it doesn't feel comfortable. The stress that never feels comfortable, but it helps us to be able to act quicker, to survive. It even helps us in our families. So if a husband and a wife are having a conversation together and say the husband is thinking to himself, look, I can't be bothered for this conversation. He's not stressed out at all. He's just upset. There's no adrenaline pumping through the body. Then what's going to happen is he's most likely just going to say, look, don't worry about it. He's going to be very dismissive, and that's going to cause problems. But if there's a little bit of stress and the husband is thinking to himself, hang on a second, I've got to take this seriously. I've got to really respect my wife, and I've really got to listen to her. And he starts getting a little bit stressed, not too stressed, because remember, if we go back to this curve, see where the peak is? If it's a really, really high level of stress, then again, that husband is going to pass on an unhealthy level of stress to the wife, to the kids, and the husband, being the head of the family, he's supposed to be the head, right? So the husband is supposed to set the example, supposed to set the tone. Our church doesn't believe that the husband is a manager and he's the one that dictates, what happens. No, it's equal partnership in terms of what we decide for ourselves, what we're going to do with the kids. But we believe in the biblical notion that the husband is like Christ. He is the one that acts first. He is the one that, if there's going to be peace in the family, he's going to show that example first, and then the rest of the family then kind of follow that example. That's the attitude of submission that we believe in as Orthodox Christians. So if the husband is thinking, okay, so let's just say his stress level is not a 7 or an 8 out of 10, because that's way too high for the situation. That's going to make the conflict worse. It's going to make the family stress worse. But if it's, say, a 2 or a 3 out of 10 in that situation, if the church was going to catch fire, we need it to be an 8 or a 9 out of 10, right? But for a situation where there's a conflict between a husband and a wife, it's probably unnecessary for the stress level to be a 5 or a 6 out of 10. That's probably a little bit too high for that situation. But a 2 or a 3 out of 10 is better than a 0, because a 2 or a 3 will get the brain working. Okay, why is she upset? Okay, no, I'm going to leave what I'm about to do, and it's really important to spend time with her, and the heart might be sort of palpitating and beating a little bit faster, and that's okay, and that's healthy. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not bad. And it could actually save a marriage, because if you continually respond this way, the other person's going to say, oh, he actually cares about me. He's a little bit stressed. He's a little bit concerned about me, right? So this whole idea of no stress, I can't be experiencing any adrenaline, I can't be experiencing a faster heartbeat, I can't be experiencing any stress, that's wrong. Family stress is a bad thing, but individual stress that God has created, He's created this in the body for a reason. People who have mental health issues and they have a history of anxiety and they've had trauma in their lives, this system of stress is overfiring. It's too much sometimes. Sometimes there's a situation that only requires a level 2 or a 3, but they're functioning at a level 7 or 8 of stress. That's when a person needs to go and get help. That's when a person, most likely, unless there's a miracle story here or something like that, but God doesn't always allow for miracles to happen. Sometimes God wants people to take responsibility for their own salvation and for their own benefit, and to actually say, you know what, I need to go and get help. I need to join a group, or I need to see a psychologist, or whatever it may be, because these things don't just go away on their own. Sometimes God cures cancer, sometimes He doesn't. It's all up to the will of God. It's the perfect will of God. So we can't say, we can't put God in a box and say, He's going to heal me. We say, God, show me the path. Don't allow me to be very stubborn. Allow me to be flexible. Because again, we're going to talk about what the characteristics in a family are that lead to positive outcomes whenever there's family stress. And one of the really damaging factors that families have is this non-flexibility, very rigid ideas. And sometimes it's from the culture, sometimes it's from the family of origin that was raised, it depends on so many factors. So it's important to be flexible in our thinking. So family stress is defined as anything that disturbs, upsets, or puts pressure on the family system. So it's coming from the outside. And it creates a demand-resources imbalance. So a demand is something that comes from the outside. It could be something as simple as receiving a fine in the mail. It could be being audited by the tax office. It could be, a child, one of the children in the family are getting bad grades at school, or they're getting bullied at school. Sometimes that can be really stressful for the family. So that's a demand. So something is demanding on the family. And the resources are the resources that are available within the family. The resources can be mental resources. It can be that the parents in the family, both of them were raised with a very good upbringing where very positive ways of thinking were modeled to them. So their parents, whenever there was a conflict or a stressful situation, their parents might have handled that in very positive ways, where they stayed calm. They could still a bit of stress, but an adequate amount of stress, where they were thinking, they were problem solving and thinking, hang on a second, let's not jump the gun, let's not think too far, versus the family that says, panic mode, you know what I mean? What are we going to do now? They're firing at a level 7 or an 8 out of 10. If your parents were like this, you're most likely going to be like that as well, right? It's a very simple rule in psychology. Whatever your parents were like and how they handled situations, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see that behavior in yourself as well. Unless you've actually really were mindful about it and you've, maybe seen a psychologist or you spent a very long period of time working on yourself, then that's a different story. But most people haven't. So it creates a demand resources imbalance. So if the demand that's coming from the outside is greater than so resources are not just mental resources and emotional resources, but it's also the support that's around the family. Like this community that we're all in here in the church, this is a fantastic resource. This is a huge support network. Without this, some people commit suicide. Some people, would have been divorced by now. The amount of support and resources that the church provides us with is unquestionably is very, very important. But with all of those resources, if the demands are too much for the resources that are available, this is when the family system is going to go downhill, and then you're going to start to find dysfunction. If you build up your resources, but you can't build up your resources last minute. It doesn't work that way. The resources has to be a lifestyle. It has to be something that's ongoing and preventative, so that remember, it's not if, it's when family stress occurs. Things happen outside of our control. People die. If you have a look at the war in Palestine, okay, unexpected. It wasn't unexpected, but things like that happen in life. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't know what's going to happen. So we need to have a lot of resources and understand this concept of resources so that we're preparing ourselves. And spirituality and our relationship with God is the most important resource, I would say. That is the number one resource. But it's not just that. We have to also think about other things that God has provided us with. In this country, we're very lucky because we have a healthcare system that is, and in Canada and Britain and places like that, we're very lucky that we're walking around in a country where seeing a psychologist is like seeing a GP, for instance, especially these days. I've got people that say that are very comfortable, say, "Oh, I'm just seeing my psychologist," or whatever. It's become very, very normal. And this is a very good thing because it makes people think, okay, well, there's not this stigma around mental health. If I've got a problem, and a lot of people in society do, the majority of people in society have anxiety or depression or any of these sorts of things. It's not a small percentage of society. They say that more than 50% of people, easily more than 50% of people in society will go through huge periods in their life where they're going to experience things that are abnormal, like depression and anxiety. It's only maybe a lot less than half who will spend their entire life just going through normal ups and downs. Majority of people, I would say, will go through very big kind of roller coaster, ups and downs. So where was I going with this? So the stigma, and stigma around mental health. I feel that the reason why, especially those of you who are born in Egypt and Arab countries, the problem, I feel, this is my opinion from what I've read, and it's not official, but this is just my opinion, and it's good for everybody to understand, or to consider this opinion. Think about it. It's, at the end of the day, it comes down to the policies of a country, comes down to the money that's allocated to the state government or to the federal government or whatever. But when you think about it, if you think about the way the Egyptian kind of system works and the country, and it's very similar probably to countries like Lebanon or countries like Iraq or countries like that. There's a lot of similarities, but very, very different to countries like Australia and Canada and things like that, where there's a lot more transparency. You see what I'm saying? So countries over there, and I don't want to get political here, but if you have a look at Mubarak, for example, and the typical statements that people make, that he stole the country's money and things weren't very clear as to what was going on and things like that. So these sorts of countries, because there's a lot of greed at such a high level, what tends to happen is not enough money is given for the people, not just for their physical health, but for their mental health as well. So people will only, because money is not given, people will only go and see health professionals like psychologists and psychiatrists if, not just that, but if the mental health issue is a very severe one, say like schizophrenia or something like that's unbearable, that's unmanageable. But if it's depression is quite serious, but don't worry about it. We can live with depression. We can't live with schizophrenia. So slowly over many, many decades and over a long period of time, psychology and psychological services in the healthcare system in those countries become associated with what? Maganin, right? People that are crazy. So if I go and see a psychologist, it means I'm one of those people. But here, you can go and get a mental health care plan from a GP to go and see a psychologist, and it will cover the majority of the session fees. And you can just be going through relationship stress, and your relationship's still okay and everything, but you just want to take that step because you don't want it to get worse, for instance, or you're going through work stress or something small like that. So we're lucky to be in a country where we're allowed to go and see a psychologist and not be judged. So think about that, and also think about, it's not that you go and see a psychologist and only a few people see a psychologist, or only people that have very serious mental health issues go and see a psychologist. You have a lot of people that probably live longer because they go and get more blood tests. They pick up, on diseases sooner rather than later. And it's the same thing with psychology as well. If you just go and get checkups, or you go and take care, it doesn't have to be seeing a psychologist. It can be going online, and there's lots of online resources that you can go to. But the whole thing that I'm trying to say is have a proactive attitude, whether it be for yourself or for your partner or for your kids. Have a proactive attitude that says, let's not make our mental health, the help and the support that we get, reactive. Let's make it proactive. So if I notice the smallest problem starting to come up, let me try to get on top of it straight away, right? Rather than waiting until the last minute and then we're active. Same thing with physical health as well. It's going to be much better if you pick up on a cancer that's starting as opposed to one that's been around for a long period of time. So there's two types of stress. When it comes to family stress, there's what we call eustress, which is positive stress, and there's distress, which is negative stress. So I'll show you some examples. So, they're kind of connected, but so when we're talking about stress right at the beginning, this was just the stress reaction that God has created, right, with adrenaline and the fight or flight response, as you mentioned. But then we defined family stress as different to the normal definition of stress. So that the stress, first definition was the individual stress that I experienced personally and the physiological responses in the body. Then family stress is referring more to the outside things that come and attack a family, the problems that might occur. And within the family stress, there's two types. There's eustress, which is still external, and there's distress, which is also external. So it'll become more clear when I go through some examples. So with eustress or positive stress, these are just some examples of positive stress. So things like starting a new job or a business, right? It creates a lot of pressure because I don't know what's happening. I'm still not used to the role. I come back home and I'm thinking about the next day. How am I going to manage things? Can be very healthy. That can actually contribute to a person living longer as well. So another really interesting phenomenon that we notice is that people who have this idea in their mind, I just want to retire because I want to end, when I'm 60 or 65 or whatever it is, I want to retire and I just want to, this is the time in my life where I should be stress-free. No work, nothing. What do you think happens when people do that? They're still physically healthy. They're still mentally very sharp. What do you think happens when people do that? Does anybody know what tends to happen? They start getting depressed. They start getting more stressed. They actually die younger as well. So people that retire, actually their lifespan, they don't live to the, not longer age. So this whole idea in our minds in Western society, that Western society sells us that you should be stress-free, you retire, and then they show you these beautiful holiday destinations that you can go and live in, after you retire. It's not true. It's a lie. It's a lie because the minute that you actually stop doing these kinds of things, you actually live less and more disease starts to come, both mentally and physically as well. So so we should always be looking for these sort of things. So if one of our kids, gets married, it's a stressful time, but it's good. It can be handled. Some families handle it terribly, and some families handle it beautifully. Both involve stress. The families that handle it really well are still stressed. There's still stress involved, but it's healthy. It's a healthy thing. In fact, the research shows that families that are faced with positive stress, not all at once, but from time to time, they actually grow closer than families where there's no stress coming their way. And I know a lot of families who they're very, I don't know how to say this in Arabic, but in English we say risk averse. They're risk averse. Risk averse means somebody who stays away from any kind of risk. You know what I mean? So if, so let's stay home. You know what I mean? Let's, no, this is too stressful. We're going to plan, let's not plan the wedding, or let's not do this. Or families that are like that try, the reason why they do this is because the mentality is, I've got to stay away from stress, any kind of stress, even a low level of stress. To avoid. It's usually a trauma-based reaction. There's things that usually have happened in their life in the past that have been difficult. So, yeah. I'll be happier. I'll have a better relationship. The less stress in the family, the better. It's not true. The more stress that is in a relationship, provided that it's not too much, it actually has positive health benefits, both physical and mental. Things like planning a new baby into the family, welcoming a family, planning a family vacation. So people who plan, people that stay home and don't go on holidays and things like that. It's not, unless you're really busy with other family things. But starting a new hobby or an activity. So you always encourage you to always look for things to do that are a little bit stressful. Okay, not when I say the word stressful, I don't mean over your limit. I mean, try to always be outside of your comfort zone. And I've always believed, as an Orthodox Christian, that this is very much in line with our Christianity, because sorry, yeah, because the moment we kind of like if we think, oh, we've got to be relaxed, we've got to be stress free, I believe that's when the devil starts playing. It's the devil's playing ground, right? So always have things planned, and that keeps a family healthy as well. Yeah, 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 and it brings families like communicate. It gives more chance to communicate. However, on the other hand, if the family dynamics are very bad and very dysfunctional, and there's not already good communication especially between husband and wife, and then these things come like planning a wedding or things like that, then it can be actually bad, because the existing dynamics in the relationship are not good, and then therefore anything is going to be bad, whether it be positive stress or negative stress. Anything is going to be bad. So it's working on the foundation of a relationship between husband and wife is really, really the key to the family, the family unit. It doesn't start with the kids. So if there's problems with the kids, don't look at the kids as the starting point. Always go back and see, what is it that we can fix? What is it we can fix as a husband and wife? That's always the starting point. Examples of negative stress, things like divorce or separation of families, of parents. Someone in the family gets chronic illness, for instance, financial difficulties or job loss. By the way, I don't know, how much time do we have? Like until... Okay. Someone in a family starts getting addicted, to some kind of substance or drugs or something like that. Academic or behavioural problems with a child. Legal problems. Someone in the family gets diagnosed with depression or a mental health issue, and it happens sometimes in families, and they say, oh, this person's depressed. It puts a lot of pressure on their family. So these are the kinds of things that would be negative stress that are not good. But if the family is well resourced, they're obviously going to deal with these things a lot better. And if they're also well resourced and they communicate well with one another, then definitely we want a lot more of these things, these positive stress examples. We want a lot of, but even if a family is well resourced, obviously we don't want these things, but if they happen based on God's will, then it's still important to be resourced, because it's going to prepare you, for those things. We're almost done, and then we'll have... Yeah. That's right. That's right, because how do you respond to those events? So sadness is a normal part of life. So if we think to ourselves as Christians, no, we shouldn't be sad. Sometimes I feel that sometimes in Christian community, sometimes this idea is pushed too much. Oh, I can't be sad. We've always got to be happy. To some degree, yes, because Christ resurrected, and every day for us should be resurrection, and we should be happy. But if God allows for something to happen to someone, God forbid, a family member, and we're upset for a long time because I was close to that person, and then they died suddenly and it wasn't expected, then obviously the sadness you can't help it. The sadness is going to last for a lot longer than usual, and it's not wrong. Don't think that you're not a good Christian, and if you were a good Christian, then your anguish and your sadness is going to go away like this. No, it's a normal human response. So within reason. But if you're sad for more than 3 months, and it's lasting 5 years and it's still happening, then there's the mental health issues. Then you need to go and seek professional help. Then you need to really, do something about it. But Christ himself was in anguish in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is Christ. And he was very anxious to the point where, there were droplets of blood, coming from him. He was sorry? Yeah, and St. Paul. So these things are very normal, but we're lucky that we've got the resources to be able to, in this day and age, to be able to access lots of information at our fingertips, professional help, psychologists and so on. So it's very important. It's almost like, I feel like it's almost a sin if we don't help ourselves in that way. To just say, oh, don't worry, I'm strong, I'm going to battle on, God's going to help me. I feel like it's almost like a sin to do that, because God's giving you the opportunity. Everybody has the opportunity to help themselves and to show that responsibility of, hey, there's an issue here, I've got to get help straight away. But if you neglect that, it's like you're neglecting someone else. Why would you neglect yourself? If you neglect the poor, if you neglect, someone else, you neglect yourself, it's it's not our right to say, I'm not going to care about myself, or I'm just strong enough, I'm just going to keep on, moving forward. What does it mean that we're strong? The word strength means that I build something. It could be like physical strength. I build my muscles. I don't just get muscles on its own. I've got to exercise. I've got to go to the gym. I've got to do all of those things. So where did you get that from? You didn't get the strength from yourself. You got it from externally, and then that reflected in you. Same thing with mental health as well. If you want to get strength, you go read, you go see someone, you go get professional help, then you get the strength. So there's this idea that's out there in a lot of communities and a lot of groups that says, oh, you don't need to go see anyone. Just go to church, pray to God, and stay strong. You don't need anyone else. Stay strong. That's not strength. That's you. If you just rely on yourself, or you just rely on coming to the church, yes, that's beautiful. But you need as many resources. You need as many strengths as you can, because then those strengths will be reflected in the resources that are available to you and the resources that are available to your family as well. Yeah. The disciple.
Yeah.
Which is student. In Greek, the disciple means student in the, yeah.
So it is a kind of seeking like guidance, support, experience, help.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I think it's very biblical as well. So this is the last table that I'm going to show you. So these are, what you find here on the left-hand side are examples of risk factors in families. So these are the sorts of things we don't want. We don't want to be like this, what's on the left-hand side. And the things that are on the right-hand side, it's called protective factors. So the risk factors on the left-hand side, these are things that psychologists have noticed that dysfunctional and bad families, this is what a bad family looks like, all these things that are on the left. The things that are on the right, when they've noticed very close families that communicate well, that when adversities happen, whether it be positive stress or whether it be negative stress, and they handle these things very well, this is what they've noticed, all the things on the right-hand side. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll give you some examples. So risk factors are poor individual skills, distant family relationships. لما you go to those families and الأب يكون قاعد لوحده في الجراج أو في in the room, and everybody's kind of doing their own separate things. They don't eat together. They don't have meals together. They don't really know a lot about each other. And you go to another family, everybody's very happy they know everything about each other, and they're very close and they communicate very well. I'm going here. What are you going to do now? So they've noticed, psychologists have noticed that families that look more like, they communicate a lot more and they know a lot more about each other. They make the effort, because it's not easy to always eat together. It's not easy to always communicate together. It requires effort, and it requires a mindset where you've got to make a decision, even if you don't want to, even if you don't feel like it, I'm tired or whatever. You have to consciously think to yourself, I'm doing this because this is a protective factor. Otherwise, the normal thing that's going to happen for any family is that it's much easier to be, and it will be the relationships within the family will become more and more distant. So it doesn't automatically happen that everyone's close. So when you see that in families, usually they've made a very, very conscious effort to do that. Inflexible thinking versus flexible thinking. So that can be applied to so many things. So inflexible thinking is, we can't get into any financial stress at all. This will be a disaster. It's impossible. We can't even look at that. Right? Flexible thinking will be, look, if it happens, it happens. But these are the resources. This is how we can deal with it. So there's like flexibility in our way of thinking. Inflexible thinking is things like, if our son doesn't perform well at school, for example, he gets involved with the wrong crowd and gets on drugs or whatever. Flexible thinking is, we're going to do the best we can to give them the best opportunity in life. But if God wills for these things to happen, if God wills for it, let's talk about it from now as to what we're going to do and how we're going to handle these situations. Yes, it's going to be unpleasant. Yes, it's going to be upsetting, but we'll grow closer together and we'll talk through it. This is a very flexible way of talking and communicating and thinking about these sorts of issues. And again, that doesn't normally happen. The normal thing that happens is we have, as human beings, very fixed ideas. like coping strategies. Like I said, panic mode. Families are going to panic mode. Something's happening, going to panic mode, versus another family where there's it's not like there's zero anxiety. No, there's still anxiety. There's still stress, but they all support each other and they talk even about the stress that they're feeling. There's many, many families, probably in our church and all over our community, that they're not encouraged, they're actually discouraged from talking about negative things that happen in the family. Like I know families where it doesn't happen a lot in the Australian culture as much as it does in the Egyptian culture and stuff like that. But if a family member has cancer, say an auntie or an uncle, something like that, not a lot of people know about that. They keep it a secret, keep it hidden. It's a shame or something like that. Mental health issues is also a shame. So I think we need to be in a community where we normalize these things and talk about them. The same way that person might get a physical illness, they can also get a mental, illness as well. And so we need to be a lot more open in talking about that within the family, especially as well.
Let me ask you a question. If one of the parents, mother or father, facing trouble, facing depression, facing anxiety, for point of sharing, can he or she sharing such suffer with the kids?
Okay, so if there's, say, financial problems and there's a lot of personal issues between the families, it has to be age appropriate. You wouldn't talk about those things with very young kids. For instance, even teenagers, you wouldn't want to, because it still burdens them. But we shouldn't go to the other extreme and say, no, I've got let's just say, for instance, the on the dad's side of the family, the dad has a family. He's got family members that have a gambling addiction and drug addiction, and he's really worried about his family. He's really anxious. So he's coming home from work very anxious every day. It's not like, let's just say that they've got teenagers, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, and their father comes home, and obviously he can't hide it. He's genuine distress. It wouldn't be a good idea for him to pretend as if there's nothing going on. So it wouldn't be appropriate for them to talk about the details of what's happening, but at least say, there's something that's going on. You don't have to worry about it. We've got it under control, but it's causing anxiety. But to normalize the anxiety and say, look, you're probably going to feel anxious from time to time when you grow up, and that's okay. I'm feeling it now, but look at us. It doesn't stop us from still moving forward as a family, still doing things together. Look, we love each other. So focus a lot on the positives and mention that there is anxiety, and normalize the anxiety so that the kids, when they grow up and they feel anxious because something happens in their life, they don't feel, oh my God, anxiety is here. They're already used to it. They've already seen it before and they've seen it being dealt with in a healthy Christian way. So,
one of the parents ask for their kids support, emotional support, mental support, if they suffer?
Most of the time, what I see, it can be very toxic when that happens, and it's very bad, I think, for a parent to, if there's especially for if it's a mother and she's very close to the kids, to dump all of this information onto the kids. It's a huge burden. The kids they're not mature enough to deal with all of that. It's a different story if that kid is married and they're 30 years old and a different relationship now that they have with their mother. But while they're still kind of in the family house, and while there's it's not appropriate. And there might be different opinions on this, but I think definitely with kids and early teenagers, no. But my opinion is even with kids that are 15, even 18, still maybe a little bit young, there's a lot of support out there, and if that mother or that father or the person that's suffering they don't need the child to help them. It doesn't have to be the child. In fact, they can go to someone who doesn't know them, and then because a mother who's opening up to her child, for instance, or a father who's opening up to his daughter or son, they're going to have to also be thinking about, well, I'm burdening my kids. But if I'm talking to a health professional, that's their job. I'm not burdening any person in my family. So, and I'm getting professional help as well. How is my kid going to be able to give me the right advice, or to be able to, help me with these issues? They have very little experience. So,
right, but sometimes you consider as a sharing the pain, or complaining about life.
That's not good.
So
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
excuses of like non-behaving efficiently, like kind of this, which is very stressful as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You mean when they're complaining about the kids, for instance? Yeah, of course. That's a lack of resources. So I'm not sure if it's mentioned here on this table, but yeah, so rigid rules, that's probably the closest kind of thing, like under balance, and it says rigid rules. And then like sometimes even in our own mind as parents, we have rigid rules. The kids can't do this, but it's important to look at yourself first and think, well, why are the kids like this? It's probably because of the way they've been raised. It's probably because of arguments that they've seen. It's probably because of trauma that they've faced, within the family household and things like that. That doesn't mean that there's no discipline. The discipline goes out the window, but there is this is on a different topic, but I'll just mention it. There is such a thing as positive parenting that doesn't involve punishment. So there is something called logical consequences that are very predictable, but without punishing, without smacking, without hitting a child. But it requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of positivity at the times where the kids are behaving appropriately, and it requires a lot of mental energy. It requires a lot of physical presence, with the children. Punishment is an easy option, but if you'd like, you can look into that. Like positive parenting programs are really, really, helpful. And this is like it's usually a program that's done over like 8 weeks and things like that. So it requires a lot of steps, and there's a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration. But I think there's some seminars where it kind of just touches on the different topics, just to give an idea. So not the strategies, but just to give the idea that can be done maybe over a 40-minute kind of session or period or something like that. But yeah. But these are the how to deal with family stress. So just very basic tips here. So when a problem comes, problem solve and make changes, and don't just sort of sit there and panic. And that's what a lot of sometimes families do. Support each other. You'd be surprised. A lot of these things sound like common sense things, but they're not done. They're not done, in a lot of families. So seeking social support, like I said, there's that stigma, that shame, the fact that you want to build your strengths and you want to build your resources. Someone who's strong is somebody who draws on strengths, not somebody who says, I'm going to stay here in my little bubble, and they're not taking on, external factors that make them stronger. And like I said, I use that example of the gym. Can you imagine someone who says, I'm going to get stronger without lifting weights, without doing cardio, I'm going to get fitter without doing all of these things. So all these things, you need external resources to help you with all of those things. But people don't think that way. They think, no, I'm going to go to external sources. I'm going to go read up on how I can eat better and how I can, build my physique or build my immune system and build all of those things. You get those information from the outside anyway. So why aren't we ashamed that we're getting all this information about our physical health from the outside? Why are we ashamed when it comes to mental stuff and then we're not seeking it? We shouldn't distinguish. We are human beings. God created us as He created us as a body, soul and spirit. So these are all components of the human being. We shouldn't treat one more highly than the other. They're all kind of very valid, parts of our humanity. Self-care for the whole family. Adjust your mindset. Mindfulness and meditation is a really important thing, and there's really good Christian meditation exercises. So when we're feeling stressed, if you notice that your stress is a little bit high, without seeing a psychologist and anything like that, you can there are lots of good apps on your phone, or just Google, mindfulness meditation, especially if you download like Christian mindfulness or Christian meditation. It'll use Bible verses and it'll help you how to connect the Bible verses with your breathing. So mindfulness is all about, it's a scientific process or strategy that a lot of psychologists use. And what it is it's watching your breathing, watching your body, being aware of your surroundings. And if you bring the Christianity and Bible verses into that as well, it will really help you to connect with yourself and with God. And it's almost like the Bible verses, it's a form of prayer. We call it a lot of the in our church we call it the silent prayer, for instance. But this is a very specific form of silent prayer where we're noticing ourselves in relation to God, where we're feeling God within us. We're very aware of like our surroundings, and this can be, it's proven to be very helpful to manage stress, to bring stress levels not down to zero, but to an acceptable and a beneficial level. So like I said before, I just end up by what I want you to take away from today. One of the key messages is that stress is not all bad. It's actually beneficial, but we want to keep it at an appropriate level for the situation. So if it's a low-level situation, such as a conflict between husband and wife over something like, small, then, a 2 or a 3 out of 10, where 10 is the highest disturbance you can imagine, a level 1 or a 2 would probably be, or a 3 would probably be appropriate. But if it's a really high-level situation, such as, one of your kids has been in a car accident or something like that, it's not good if it's any less than a 5 out of 10, right? So if you think about stress in that way and how stress can work for you, and how if it's too much, maybe I need to start using relaxation exercises, mindfulness exercises, that's a much more flexible way of looking at stress, as opposed to got to be stress-free, because this is an idea in society, unfortunately, that is common sense, but not all common sense things that we believe and that we hear about are true. So, I'll leave it at that. I don't know if we have any time for questions.
Yeah, all the topic in English, huh? You happy today?
So, I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah. Any question? I got one actually, like a real ill one of the parents, and the very toxic, and the other parent try to avoid his or her effect on the child. How the healthy one avoiding the kids from the toxic atmosphere or like pressure coming from the real ill person.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer, because there's a lot of factors to consider. Is the person who's toxic, the toxic member of the partnership, are they showing signs that they're willing to change or not? Because
No.
this is,
For example,
if no, then that's going to change, I guess, what the suggestions that can be made to the other person if they're not showing any signs. Because if they are, then there's a lot of help that's available. If they're not, then is the family setup? Can it be the case where they can the person who's being toxic, can they actually be respectful or agree to be respectful enough to maybe position themselves somewhere where they're going to be away from the rest of it? Obviously, it's not ideal. It's not ideal for the kids to see that both of their parents separated, but sometimes it is better that way if there's constant arguments and there's all these examples constantly of bad communication. The research shows that the kids are going to be worse off. Even the marriage is going to be worse off later on. And I know that in our Orthodox Church, it is encouraged by bishops and priests that if there is a lot of unhealthy things, it doesn't have to be, obvious domestic violence or anything like that, but if there is very bad communication styles and it's obviously affecting and there's an unwillingness to change, then sometimes I've heard priests, I've heard bishops say, okay, go live in separate houses, you know what I mean? And and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing, again, it's a flexible way of thinking. It's not this whole idea of, no, what are people going to say? No, as Christians, we have to live with each other and things like that. I don't believe God works that way. Everything, we have to be very discerning and we have to be wise. And we have, if the research and, God's given us, the research that psychologists have come up with, that's not their own, formulation. Psychologists are noticing things that God has probably put in the blueprint of humanity, and they're just noticing and they're basically just coming up with all these theories, but it's really God that's created these things. Same thing with medicines. You know, human beings didn't create certain pills or cures or things. They've merely just discovered them. You know, it's God who allows for all of these to happen. The basis is God. So if the research is showing us very, very clearly that families are going to be severely affected, and how can you have love in your heart knowing that this is going to affect your marriage, going to affect the kids, and not do something about it? So it doesn't have to be that the parents, you know, get a divorce or anything like that. It can simply be a different way of managing, you know, the issue. Yeah.
He admitted to the hospital, يعني as if he have been in a place for his safety or her safety, and keeping the other party's safety as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you, Ramsey. It's
No
so
worries.
like
No, it's my
beneficial
pleasure.
lecture.
It was a blessing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.